George R.R. Martin, everyone's favorite author who produces nothing in the past 10 years, he's given his opinions on the world of fandoms because, it's so terribly hard doing nothing these days. And, taking about a decade to write a single novel. But he says, and this was a great little quote from him. It was on his blog, actually. It was a post entitled Dark Days. It says, current mood, depressed. This year, though, I reflected on the year that we've just lived through. I found I had no appetite for living through any of that again. 2023 was a nightmare of a year for the world and the nation and for me, and mine both professionally and personally. I'm very glad that it's over. Unfortunately, 2024 looks to be even worse. While I take solace where I can, in Chocolate Thrones, if nowhere else. Yeah, no kidding, George. In books and films, television shows, though even there, toxicity is growing. It used to be fun talking about our favorite books and films and having spirited debates with fans who saw things different. But somehow in this age of social media, it's no longer enough to say, I didn't like book X or film Y, and here's why. Now social media is ruled by anti-fans who would rather talk about the stuff that they hate than the stuff they love, and delight in dancing on the graves of anyone whose film has flopped. Which I thought was an interesting comment because he seems to miss the inherent contradiction there, where you do get to say, I didn't like book X or film Y, and here's why. I can tell you the reasons why I didn't like it.
Well, confirmed, George R.R. Martin watches YouTube, so that's good. That's a good thing. But
write the damn book, George.
But here's the deal. I was talking with Gary about this, Captain Nerdrotic, earlier this week. This conversation, the type of conversation we're having now, the type of conversations you hear on FNT and a lot of other shows, that has been the same since I've been around fandom. And I've been around fandom, obviously, a long time. Gone to conventions. I didn't go to my comic book store necessarily to buy comics, although I did buy comics there. I went there for the conversation that would evolve over what's happening in comics. And I think that's why we're all here. This is why, I discovered, a lot of you from FNT, right? Like, that is just a normal nerd conversation with people that are very passionate about particular fandoms. It's no different than any conversation I'd have at a video store or a comic book store. It's just now that now we're having it in front of people who can actually chime in. So I'm surprised that George would react that way. You'd think he'd know better. I think he's just making excuses, and I don't know. I think it's really sad to see. Just stop everything and write the book. Get literally drop the mic. And also, according to Gary, he has reached out to potential co-writers who could help him finish. Good. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with teaming up with some co-writer to get it across the finish line and finish the book. And I'm so glad I never watched Echo, because I didn't, listening to all of you.
You're welcome.
The thing is, there's only one reason why you get to the point where the fans actively want your project to fail, and that's if you act like a complete and total asshole towards them, where you denigrate the fans, where you try to paint them as ists and phobes, where you blame them for all of your shortcomings and for not liking the slop that you've dished up to them, or the slop that you haven't dished up to them in about a decade. That's... You don't get to just tar them all with that brush and say, well, they're all just toxic because they don't just accept whatever I choose to do. They're fans, but they're only going to be fans as long as you do things that please them, whether it's giving them the product that they want, whether it's providing good entertainment for them, or at least giving them timely updates on your progress. If you don't do any of those things and people get pissed off, well, guess what, George? They've got every fucking right to do that.
And I think at least for us anyway, I don't consider anyone really here, anyone watching, as toxic per se. We wouldn't be doing what we're doing if we hated these things. The reason why we're so passionate about whatever it is, like Mahler for Star Wars, for example, it's because we love these things. We don't want to see them get ruined. That's a big reason why, I cover video games, right? Because I love video games so much that I don't want to see it get ruined. And I don't think any of us are just covering it because it's like, oh, we hate these things. It's like, no. I would love to see Marvel, Star Wars, Western gaming, whatever. I would love for all of it to be doing amazing right now, but the truth is that it isn't. And it doesn't make us toxic for wanting to discuss about it, have a community about it and whatever. I think he's taking the wrong angle from this. I talked about George in my most recent video that came out today, so I'm a little capped up on what he's been saying, and I don't agree with him at all. I don't find us to be toxic at all. If anything, it feels like we're the only sane ones, if that makes any sense.
I think it's easy to get wrapped up in the defense aspect, which I actually think is the point. That if someone insults you, you're like, well, I'm not like that, so you start defending yourself. And so if you read the rest of the blog and the start of it, he talks a lot about the actual world, and he's like, why do I not leave a legacy in this world? Have I even left an impact? Have I changed anyone's mind? Have I changed the way people think about the world? And then he goes into, I really like having a conversation about people who disagree with me, but now they're all toxic. And to me, if you take the entire thing as a whole, it seems like it's like he doesn't mind having a conversation with people, but they have to agree with him by the end. And the entire point of that is to change the actual world. And so when he's calling people toxic fans, by toxic, the entire point is you have a difference of opinion to me. So if you're like, well, I'm not toxic, by his definition, you are toxic because you're disagreeing with him. He knows the right way that the world should exist. You don't agree with him, therefore, by definition, you are a bad thing. And if you start defending yourself, you get sidetracked from the actual point, which is what you are doing is awful. What you are doing is trying to influence people through writing rather than entertaining them in the first place. And I've always thought taking the defensive attitude on this doesn't get you anywhere. It is more... The problem is you. The problem is you, George. The problem is what you want to do in this writing. The problem is the fact that you want to use entertainment to influence the world rather than entertain people. You're using your career as a way to attack people and kind of morph it into something it shouldn't be. You are the problem, not everybody else. And so I've never really liked having to defend yourself as toxic. It's like, I think your actions speak for yourself. I think your videos speak for yourself and your content does. And so when somebody says something like that, it's more about what they do rather than what you do.
Yeah, and I wonder if, I know Chris was suggesting that maybe George R. R. Martin is watching YouTube channels, and I wonder if that is true, or if he's just reading headlines that paint this wide picture of what the fans are doing on YouTube. Because you say something enough and it becomes this truth that a lot of people believe because they don't spend the time actually diving into the reality of things. And then anything that comes to them relating to that topic in the real world, it just kind of reaffirms their belief, right? Because they're looking at it from that lens of, well, fans are toxic, fans are toxic, fans are toxic. And it's the same, there was that viral video going around on Twitter of a teacher asking a student, why do you think J.K. Rowling is transphobic? But he's just heard that so many times that when they actually take some time to do some critical thinking and he dives into what the tweets that she made that were supposedly transphobic actually were, he realizes, and he says, I feel kind of like a fool. And there's just so much media pushing that argument that fans are toxic. They're toxic. They're these men, and they paint this picture that they want to hang on to control, they want to hang on to their toxic masculinity and control. They don't like that women are involved. They don't like that diverse groups are involved. And that's just that vast belief.
Well, I'll say this. I know for a fact that Gary Beekler was on a tour of the Orville television show by invitation. On the same tour was an entourage of people that included George R. R. Martin, who shook everyone's hand. And when it got to Gary, he looked away. He knew who Gary was. Gary's told this story many times, actually. Mm-hmm. So you can ask him about it directly, but
I believe you.
Yeah, he knows that there is discontent with regard to his choices of allotting his time. So I don't know. I just think it'd just be so easy to make it all go away by teaming up with someone. He's not a young man, and finish the story.
Brandon Sanderson would do an incredible job, just like he did with The Wheel of Time.
I think maybe just apologizing as well for how long it's taken and just giving some sort of explanation instead of the impression I get from his previous posts is that he acts like a bit of a petulant child. Like, oh, why do you keep hassling me about this? Just leave me alone.
He can give the apology once
you deliver stuff.
releases something, I think you should just shut the fuck up, work complete, and then apologize and release. That should be the thing that happens. But
Well, the thing is,
yeah,
if he
that'd
did
be
this book,
preferable.
there's more afterwards. So he's
of
probably
course,
like,
of
there's
course. But
so
at least
much stuff
if he
to
released
do, he can't be
something, we
bothered.
could then have hope that he's making things. But what I was going to bring up as well is the unfortunate thing with Gary and with many others. Who knows how he gets his information? If it's people telling him what people say about him, or if he sees it himself, or if he looks at
Likely.
quotes
You're right.
or summaries. Because a lot of people on the internet despise us for things we've literally never said. Like it's gotten insane at this point with like cultural bubbles. But something that annoyed me about some of his wording, it's like, oh, it used to be such a great thing to talk about our favorite stuff. And it's like, if anything, I might argue it's better now than it was however long ago, because a lot of these conversations about our favorite things are prompted by comparison to newer stuff. And so it gives us a bit of an oomph to be like, oh, I'll explain it now. Instead of us watching, Lord of the Rings when it comes out, maybe enjoying it and maybe explaining how it's working, blah, blah, blah. But like these days we'll be like drilled down into specific, writing arcs and how they're built and where they come from and, how it compares to the book, because we want to make sure we understand why it's failing now versus then. Instead of agreeing we all enjoy a thing and being happy, now we might, want to drive home very specific comparisons. And some of those make me think about this. I did 2 Suicide Squad streams, and I already did 3 Arkham Asylum streams after it, and I'm planning on doing City after that. And it's like,
I love those games.
Yeah, I love them too. And it's like, why? It's like, well, because it's a fucking, let's go back and appreciate them, talk about their differences, and see the differences for ourselves instead of just talking about how, they were better, trust me, sort of thing.